He is the Democratic pollster for Hit Strategies, Mr. Terrence Woodbury. What's up, sir?
What's up, Clay? Always a pleasure to be back with you and your listeners.
Yes, yes. Thank you for being here. Brother, I want to start here. There is so much conversation about police, especially here in New York, about defund the police. And there are candidates in the New York mayoral race who do want to defund like $2 billion out of 10 billion. And folks are acting like that means it's going to, they want to abolish the police. But you have an interesting poll that's out right now as far as the views of Black Americans and the term defund the police. Explain what you found.
Absolutely, Clay. So this is hot off the presses, brother. We have some recent data out of the field this week that we'll be releasing over the course of this week. That's a part of our Black Track, which is a monthly poll of Black voters that allows us to really keep the pulse on how attitudes and perceptions of Black voters are evolving over time. And frankly, one of the places we've seen the most evolution is on questions of policing and on defunding the police. Where over the past year, since the summer of 2020, the summer of unrest, where we really saw young people and people of color taking to the streets to protest after George Floyd's death, we've really seen an evolution on attitudes towards police and attitudes towards defund until in our recent poll just this week, a majority of Black voters support defunding the police. In fact, 54% say they support defunding the police. And what's more interesting, Clay, is when we rephrase the question to say, would you support reallocating resources away from the police and overhauling police departments? 67% of Black people support. This is a shift.
Mm.
Black folks have often prioritized public safety over drastic police reforms. And so it is interesting that even in a summer now where we are seeing spikes in violence and spikes in crime, that there is still a call amongst Black voters to drastically reform and even to defund the police department.
So let me ask you this. I know this is a tough question. You aren't in New York, but just according to your polling, what's interesting right now in the New York mayoral race, the person in the lead right now is a man named Eric Adams, who is a former NYPD police officer. He is Black. He's trending number one, and his thing is more police. He even said he wants off-duty police officers being armed in churches, which we all know off-duty police officers being armed. Every stat shows that makes our lives less safe. He says as a mayor, he would carry a gun. And the narrative is, and you never know with the polls sometimes, but the narrative is that Eric Adams is resonating with Black voters because he's saying more police, more police, more police. I find that hard to believe because I don't know any Black folks who feel that way, but I'm not a pollster. But it's an interesting narrative. We've had folks call in and say, hey, he's resonating because, there's so much crime going on right now in New York City. So what does that say to you? It appears that something isn't lining up. What does that say?
Clay, it's not uncommon that there are contradictions in data, and even more important, contradictions within people, right? That people have conflicting attitudes about things. And one of the things that we find in focus groups is that, there is a demand amongst Black voters to feel safer, right? To secure their streets, who are seeing an influx in violence and in crime that I do think is a result of the pandemic, of unemployment, of economic anxiety, of all the underlying factors that contribute to higher crime. And so you do see Black voters, especially older Black voters over 50, who are prioritizing public safety. But what's interesting is that even amongst those voters, you still have near 50%, 47% of Black voters over 50 saying that they support defunding the police. What this tells me is that we need to, exactly what Black activists have been saying, is reimagine public safety, that are a part of why so many only 56% support defunding the police, is that for that other half, the only alternative to defunding the police is no police, right? And so this is where we have to do a better job of messaging, of narrative, of describing what an alternative to militarized policing looks like. And frankly, I think Eric Adams is resonating with that other half of the Black community that says that public safety is their number one priority. Again, when we see 56% of people saying that they want to defund the police, there's another half of people that don't. And that's who
Right.
he's resonating with. And so, this is it is incumbent not just on Democrats and activists and advocates, but it is incumbent on us to really start to describe the alternatives. There are places around the country that are taking more drastic reform measures,
Yeah.
and I think that there's some candidates in New York that should be pointing at some of those at some of the places that have had some success with police reform.
You know what scares me, Terrence? I was saying this yesterday on my show. I've been hearing a lot of people. This is why these numbers are so encouraging to me. A lot of folks have been saying, we got to control this crime. We got to control this crime. Crime is out of control. It reminds me of what I was hearing in the early 90s when I was a kid in Philly, right before that 94 crime reform bill hit.
That's right.
And so, what we don't want is a crime reform bill 2.0, right?
That's
So
right.
I think we have to really, really be careful and critical to not get caught up in Republican narratives, Republican talking points, not get caught up in thinking defund the police means abolish the police, and we
That's right.
don't want to. We don't want to have this idea we can arrest ourselves out of crime or throw more people in jail and all the crime will go down. That's just shown that isn't the case. So
That's right.
I can recall there were black preachers begging for that crime reform bill. Part of the reason why it passed is because many of us said, yes, more police, three strikes and you're out, lock them up. That isn't the answer because they come out and crime continues. So this information is really important. But let me ask you this: what do we do with it? You're a pollster. You put this information out there. What do we do with it? Because in the midterms coming up, there are some people who are afraid to say defund the police. Some folks are even afraid to say police, even the softer version, a smaller budget. Take away $1 billion, $2 billion. What do we do with the information? Do we avoid it? Do candidates moving forward? Do they support this? What do they do with this messaging?
Well, the problem with Democrats sticking their fingers in their ears and singing la 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 over defund the police, the attempts to ignore it or dismiss it or treat it like it is a marginal issue. Ignoring defund the police does not mean that nobody else hears about it. It means that they only hear Republican talking points about it. And so it is incumbent upon us to figure out, how do we message this thing? How do we talk about reimagining public safety in a way that does not only mean more police, more militarization of our police departments. And I'm really glad that you brought up the crime bill, Clay, because as we begin, spreading and distributing this data, the number one audience to us are Democratic lawmakers, right? I feel like Black voters know where a lot of us stand on this. That's why we've been in the streets marching since last summer. It is Democratic lawmakers that have to understand that along with addressing issues of crime and violence, are addressing the underlying causes of those crimes. In the same poll where we see a majority of Black people saying that they want to defund the police, we also see 37% of Black people saying that they had to skip a bill in the last 90 days that they couldn't pay. 23% say that they could not pay their rent or their mortgage, and 13% say that they have actually been evicted or foreclosed. This is an economic crisis, and that economic crisis is contributing to feelings of desperation, and I believe are increasing the crime and violence in our streets.
Agreed. Agreed. I think it's really important to see it that way. Crime rises because jobs, and also let's talk about gun violence as well. So yeah, no, it's really important for us to see it that way and examine it that way. Yeah. So do you have any ideas or predictions for we talked about messaging with Democrats for 2022 for the midterms for Democrats and their messaging? I know before during the general election you were really concerned about their messaging. Do you have any have you gotten any sense of what would resonate as far as for Black voters with messaging in the midterms?
Absolutely, Clay. Another thing that we found in this poll was this overwhelming feeling of optimism amongst Black voters. We really did characterize the Black political participation in 2020 as both pain and power. Pain from COVID, pain from police brutality, pain that was resonating in protests. But that pain really did express itself in overwhelming Black power that we saw in Georgia and Wisconsin and Michigan. And we still see that power. You know, despite the pain, that the economic anxiety that I just described, we have 74% of Black people saying that their lives have gotten better since Joe Biden was elected. 86% of Black people approve of the job that Joe Biden is doing. 86%. I mean, that's getting close to Obama level numbers. Obama had 94% approval amongst Black people. Biden has 86%. You know, and so I think that the number one question that Democrats can answer in 2022 is, how has your life gotten better? If they can really describe to Black voters how their lives have improved, how we are normalizing, how this vaccine has been distributed in a fair and equitable way, and how we are actually beginning to recover an economy in an inclusive way that doesn't just put Black folks back where they were before COVID, but that actually starts to correct some of the injustices that led to us being affected the way we were, then I think Democrats have a really good shot of maintaining support amongst their most loyal voters. But they're going to have to go talk to their most loyal voters and answer that question: what have you done for me lately?
So one more question. Let me just ask you this. I want to make sure I get a clear answer from you. So Malcolm Kenyatta running for senator in Pennsylvania, Val Demings running for senator in Florida, Marcus Flowers running to challenge Margie Taylor Greene in Georgia. Do they say those words, defund the police, or do they find a different way to say it?
I think that they're going to have to lean into defund the police and redefine it and talk about it in a way that makes community safer, not just the Black community, but reimagining public safety makes insert insert audience safer. It makes young people safer, older people safer, Black community safer. That we have to really lean into this, redefine it, and not ignore it, because it is going to be on every television in America as we get closer to the 2022 election, whether we
And
talk about it or not.
And what's important about that is that if they don't find a way to redefine it, you're going to hear Republicans on Fox News saying it incessantly, saying it
That's right.
constantly. So why don't you get ahead of it and say, hey, here's what defund the police is?